The following is a public preview of the New Models podcast. For our complete library, visit patreon.com/newmodels or newmodels.substack.com.
You're now listening to New Models.
Hey, cousin.
Welcome to New Models. We've mentioned Remilia Corporation and its flagship NFT project, Milady, many times over the years, along with Angelicism 01's Film 01, which has been the subject of several New Models podcasts. Remilia exemplifies a new format in which emergent online swarms function as medium, artist, and artwork. And also, like Angelicism 01, Remilia's rise has involved a controversial weaponization of language and taboo, particularly by its founder, Charlotte Fang, referred to as Charlie throughout this episode. Depending on one's perspectives, these controversies may reflect a reclaiming of the semiotic anarchy of the earliest decades of the internet, a savvy performance to successfully hijack attention in an environment where attention is the only currency that matters, or a sincere advocacy for a Landian techno-fascist accelerationism. But this episode is not a critical interrogation of Remilia's content or its politics, or whether its extensive crypto-based financialization muddles the ability to know how much of its significant online influence is due to its artistry and how much is a product of monetary incentives. Instead, we examine Remilia's form and its relationship to networked media, how out of it a new art movement has emerged, and what we might learn from the fact that while this so-called new net art is deeply entrenched in systems of value and cultural aesthetics, it's been all but ignored by the traditional art world. Ultimately, Remilia is too important, too significant of a model of possible futures, and understanding it is too valuable for us to ignore it as well. Our guest is LB Dobis, or Leo for short, the editor of Remilia Quarterly, a physical journal of criticism, commentary, literature, and miscellanea, sourced from Remilia's community. Its first issue was published earlier this year. During our conversation, Leo shares an alternative paradigm for engaging with the internet, one that is central to Remilia's creation of its own art world, and moreover, its plan to change the internet itself. I'm Lil Internet, joined by my co-host Carly Busta. Our guest is LB Dobis from Remilia Quarterly. Let's get into it. Today we're joined by Leo, or LB Dobis, editor of Remilia Quarterly, a print publication from the internet art, exotic, decentralized finance, cute, Kali accelerationism collective, cult, Zaibatsu, Remilia Corporation. Describing itself as a literary magazine and critical journal for the new net art, Remilia Quarterly released its first issue in the spring of this year, with its content submitted entirely from Remilia's large online community. What Remilia is and does is difficult to explain, but the fact that Remilia Quarterly is ultimately an art publication gave us an entry point from which to step into the project and examine what it might mean for future art worlds. So, Leo, LB Dobis, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
As a way of beginning, maybe we could just ask you who or what Remilia is. Just like a brief history of its origin and present configuration for listeners who maybe only know about it ambiently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very difficult question. No matter how many times you anticipate it.
Sorry.
That's always the toughest question, this very general statement of what Remilia is. But I'll go through the history a little bit. So Remilia very much started out of group chats around 2021. Charlotte was organizing these group chats, collecting interesting individuals that he'd find on the timeline in these chats. Anybody that he just thought was cool, thought they were interesting, he'd put them in a chat and sort of guide the discourse in the chat. And it turned into a little like Warholian group chat, a milieu sort of hanging out there. And they started to coordinate activities through these chats. So Milady and then Remilia But fundamentally, it was a decentralized art collective. But the long answer is it has morphed into a corporate entity that plays with the internet as we know it. It really could be seen as like a playground for posters and artists. And there's a lot of artists that hang out. They have no interest in the finance. They don't know what crypto is. They can't work a MetaMask wallet. But there's also various degens. So.
And largely, I think it's the convergence of Twitter and crypto, essentially. I mean, when you say that Charlie found people on the timeline, the posters, we're really talking about Twitter here largely, right?
Yeah.
And then the crypto cycles gave an ability to fund these projects.
I mean, we can get into that part later. I think maybe the other foundational question that we need to ask you before we get into like the more interesting stuff is just, and you spell this out in issue 1 anyway, but just again, to create a baseline for listeners, could you say a few words about how the physical print journal that is Remilia Quarterly began, and then why at some point Remilia decided to, as you say, print the internet, and then how you came to be its editor?
It's very funny. Most people in Remilia, obviously, they were plucked off the timeline. I was in a unique situation. I actually knew Charlie personally. So I think in 2018, 2019, I'd see him around and like we'd hang out and lost touch with him. And then a couple of years later, he hit me up and was like, oh, I'm working on this new project. Explained it to me, sort of IRL. I was a very offline type of person at that time. I ended up making a burner Twitter account and put a Milady PFP on it. And then I just started Milady posting to figure out what the hell he was talking about. Over time, I started getting involved in various schemes, schizo posting, doing psychotic engagement. I could like post things and get him to repost it. And I didn't tell him any of this. And then a couple months later, I was like, hey man, that LB Dobis account, that's me actually. It was clear that he like sort of laid out this artistic vision that I could pick up on without any coordination. Like I was able to look through the documentation and it's like, do XYZ and you will be Milady posting or whatever. And the emergent effects from doing that were really amazing to me. And then after about maybe like a year, he asked me to be the editor of the quarterly. I mean, it's very hard to collect all these sort of disparate writers into one publication.
Yeah, it's a huge effort. I mean, just for those who don't have the physical object in front of them, I mean, I want to say it's a couple hundred pages. It's A4, a little smaller than A4.
It's executive size.
Executive size.
Exactly. Slightly smaller than A4.
Perfect. Yeah, it's a very comprehensive publication. So it's a feat to have pulled that off.
When you talk about posters and posting, Milady's, it's an NFT project. You set it as your profile picture. It's a cute little anime girl. And that cuteness is disarming. And so it kind of primes the receiver effectively before they even consciously process the content. That's my summary. But posting, and this is the difficult thing about Remilia in general, is that there's a lot of fundamental framework shifts, perspective shifts that you have to kind of be familiar with or accept to some degree to understand how it operates. So maybe on this very fundamental way, when you're talking about posters and great posters, perhaps that might be captured in print with the Remilia Quarterly, what do you mean by posting in that context? How do you see posting?
So the one key element that I think Milady brought in, well, there are two key things I'll focus on. The first one is like engaging with the net very lucidly. So posting from the tip of your mind. The best ones are always written in almost trance state where you're just plugged fully into what it is that you are engaging with algorithmically. And you're just writing in a sort of stream onto the timeline. A lot of the best Milady posts operate in that way. And so this is tied into the other element. So the first one is this sort of psychotic mode of posting or stream of consciousness mode of writing. But the other component of this is that something Remilia does is make clear directions on how one should post, right? So Milady, even if you didn't see the avatar, you could probably figure out if a Milady posted something because the way that they're sort of directed to write, either it's usually a combination of like a sort of cuteness and violence sort of coming together or like the tendency to impersonate schizophrenics. That's where schizo posting comes from. These styles are sort of directed from a seed source, so like Charlotte Fang or like the group chats, like we did with Chinese posting. We create a formula, right? Like post a Chinese girl from Xiaongshu, write a poetic phrase, translate it to Chinese, and then post that, and then quote tweet those with the same thing but with a different image. These sort of processes, they make it easier to post fast. something that these corporations do, like a TikTok or whatever, they give you like, here's a little dance of the day or whatever, do the little dance. And all of a sudden you get billions of teens posting the little dance every day. I'm not saying that's what we do. I'm saying that's just fundamentally how the internet works now. You have some framework that you can plug into, and you combine that with a tendency towards very fast, tip of the tongue writing. Milady posting comes out.
What's genius to me about that, and I'm not part of Remilia in any way, but have been an interested observer from afar, is that at a time when content is cheap, like the content almost doesn't even matter, Remilia very presciently or intuitively figured out a way to operate on the level of the protocol. You know, you're able to create a form that has so much traction that you're able to override algorithmic defaults.
Or it actually flows with it in an unconventional way.
True, exactly, yes. And to a point where you're able to create your own network within a network, right, without necessarily resisting it. I guess, you know, it's accelerationist in that sense, but like, you know, moving with it. But the fact that you're really operating on the protocol level with this, I think is particularly contemporary.
And also, I mean, it's hard for people who are always sincerely writing their thoughts or trying to make individual thoughts.
Well, that's exactly
right.
the thing,
And
right?
also people who I get my news from Twitter, right? I think there's a bit of an ultimately true, but not widely accepted understanding of what social media platforms ultimately are, which are like algorithmically directed assemblages of human communication that's actually always removing parts of human agency from what is actually said, right? I mean, to be a successful poster, you ultimately are directed by the algorithm anyways.
Right.
You are not sincerely writing your individual thoughts, right?
Right.
And I think Milady kind of takes that as a given from the beginning. And at a certain scale, you can set a theme, set a certain set of rules, and the traction of thousands of people doing it at once, you're creating the wave that you can then flow along to reach others.
This is something that's very interesting, right? Is that a lot of us come from image boards, and the image board is a non-algorithmic form based on the time of a post. To get engagement on those platforms, you had to be a very engaging writer. Like a lot of Remilia people I met have like created famous 4chan green text, or like had memes that they've written on 4chan spread to the rest of the internet because they're just so good at that type of posting. There's something very interesting, I think, that Charlie did, because he, of course, comes from that world too, and he can write on his own. But it was like this mode switch of all these image board types who are used to like writing this very engaging writing for a captive audience, and then moving that into this algorithmic sphere where those two spheres were kind of separated. And we still have a big appreciation for like void posting, but it is interesting that there's these image board style writers that have shifted into this algorithmic feed and are just able to dominate it.
The best copywriters of our generation are all like 4chan posters for sure.
I mean, of course, 4chan, just the sheer scale of it was almost like a proto recommendation algorithm that was hatched out of a hive mind or something. I mean, it was already an extremely accelerated attention economy. Anyways, yeah, that does make a lot of sense.
Going back to the discussion of how with Remilia one could relax into being part of a collective and the pressure was off. You know, pearl clutching Gen X cuspers like myself would spend hours deliberating, which is why I just can't use Twitter because I've never been able to get out of that. But participating in Remilia gives you a way out, right? You follow this formula, your subconscious can be free. In prepping for this conversation, I found myself, maybe we both did, thinking a lot about earlier avant-garde collectives that operated through a guise, of course, like Bernadette Corporation, Tikkun, who wrote Theory of Young Girl, Rena Spalling's relatedly. Also, Storm Van Helsing, which was an emanation of Colin DeLand's American Fine Arts, which when I went back, described itself as a quote, open source alter ego in the spirit of Luther Blissett. So very similar. That generation of artists was pushing back against a kind of individual artist genius figure. This was the time of young British artists, YBAs, and relational aesthetic art stars. And then by the turn of the millennium, it was responding to the creep of online social media profiles and the demand to be an entrepreneurial self, a high-frequency network node. We can come back to that history later if it makes sense. But mainly, we're both curious why, in your view, something like Remilia didn't happen earlier in internet history. Or maybe another way to ask that question would be, what were the particular conditions online that allowed or maybe necessitated Remilia to emerge when it did? Of course, there's a Bernadette line, which is like, when you're reduced to rat status, of course you form a collective. And the internet maybe by that point had rendered us that. But anyway, yeah, what are your thoughts? Like, why was it 2021, 2022 that Remilia came into being? And why not earlier? Because the mechanics were ostensibly there.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, the one obvious thing is financialization. That's like a big thing that lots of artists have all been looking at. I don't have like a ton of thoughts there, but that, of course, is the big obvious one. Charlie very specifically was saying, we're going to make an NFT to bootstrap our construction of the new internet. And that NFT will be Milady. And it is, Remilia would not be in the place that it's at today if it wasn't for the ability to do basically decentralized, anonymized finance. Milady was made right without even the revelation of any identities of anyone working. Like there was a Remilia Corporation where everyone was fully pseudonymous, and we are still pseudonymous, of course, some are doxed, but that's all enabled by crypto fundamentally. So that's the big thing.
So importantly, at a time when the conventional art world, art market, was strapped between high net worth individual networks on the one hand, and on the other hand, this performance of woke politics and institutions, that market was unavailable to actual avant-gardism. You couldn't do anything that would rock the boat one way or the other, or anything that wasn't legible. So it seemed like with the implosion of the art world in the 2010s, the only way to produce something that was legitimately avant-garde was to do something where you owned your own economy, you owned your own finance system. So I guess that makes a lot of sense. So I guess a follow-up question to this: why weren't there more experiments of Remilia's size or traction during this time? What was unique about Remilia that made it feel actually like art as opposed to a rug or any other kind of like dumb
just
NFT?
like millennial guys who still like collect sneakers with like their favorite cartoon monkeys or whatever. Like,
was it that Remilia could absorb everybody who would be interested in this particular confluence? And so there didn't need to be another, there only needed to be one because it actually was able to contain so many different kinds of things? Or do you have any thoughts on why Remilia was the one?
Yeah, it's for reference, I'm a millennial, technically, so I'm a sort of elder of Remilia in some sense. So there's a few key things. One of them is that the digital native generation definitely takes the internet as given. There's no like ironic distance between younger posters or artists to the internet like millennials had or Gen X had. Like the internet as a representation of reality is something that millennials grew up in, right? Like in the Instagram culture of I'm representing reality online, and there's a dissonance between what I represent and the true reality, and this creates some kind of mental torment. Remilia and Charlie fundamentally is advocating interfacing with the internet at a flat level. There's no drive to bring it offline. Everything that we did was online first until things like the Quarterly, but that's a sort of new development. Fundamentally, it's about being online. And the people that we attract are needs, people not in employment, education, or training. They're online 24/7. But then all of a sudden, you have a lot of people like this, mostly outsiders, fringe people, spend all day online, engaging with it as reality. And I think this is a totally different framing.
So I hear you now, and also this is reinforced by the Quarterly, of Remilia positioned as outsider and avant. I'm interested then in hearing how you would characterize the mainstream. Like, what is it avant in relationship to? What is it outsider in relationship to? I mean, I'm playing dumb, I know, but I'm just curious what language you would use to describe it.
There is a positioning against we call it like an ironic engagement with the internet or a nihilist engagement. The answer is really this. It is a reaction against millennial, like nihilist art that I grew up through, right? This sort of like breakdown of aesthetics, the individuation of art. Like a lot of artists I was around, they're in this constant struggle cycle to like create their brand. Like my view is that 2010s was sort of the art degenerating into advertising, or not even art, just like individuals online. They sort of degenerated into advertisements, and a lot of genuinely good artists, they couldn't engage with the new modes, or they refused to debase themselves. And the institutions were platforming a kind of woke There was institution capture, right? If you just went to an art museum or view the artists who were successful, I think in the 2010s, you can intuit these things that I'm referring to. I don't want to be denigrating of it, but I think there's a reason by the 2020s, the most interesting thinkers, the most interesting artists that I knew didn't call themselves artists, and they were all ending up online all at one time.
When you're speaking about millennials needing to have ironic distance when using the internet, I think there's a lot of habits that millennials have that younger people who grew up on the internet don't have, that I think makes it difficult to make these very fundamental leaps, including what millennials would see as like a shameless embrace of financialization, or to start a social media account and think, how can I work within this system to the greatest effect? Millennials have a habitual idea of wanting to like subvert it in some way or resist it in some way.
Right, which
that
is
makes sense.
Funny though, because like if you do think of Bernadette Corporation or Tikkun or Rena Spalding's, I mean, they very much are aware of operating within the channels and trying to find a weird space within the channels.
Right. Maybe there's a comparison of like critique instead of a kind of hacking mindset.
Yeah, maybe
there's a difference between those two things, but ultimately the sort of hacker mode is much more effective in this case than the critical mode that a millennial would habitually enter into when, say, using social media.
Right.
Yeah, I think that ties into something I was talking to Charlie, that it seemed that critique was subsumed into the art itself. People that framed themselves as artists appeared to really be doing critique as a way to, I don't know, like maybe control the way that their art was passing into the market. It wasn't as much like, I'm going to make some art and it's going to float and sit on its own. It's like it has to be received in this way because the way that the market receives the art is very important to whether or not it's accepted institutionally.
That's totally correct in my opinion. And at a certain point, the market required an artist to show a self-awareness of its recuperation by capital flows in order to even enter into it. So it became this almost mannerist phase of critical art where it was performing its knowledge, its self-awareness of its status as a commodity object, and therefore that granted it access into the market. But, you know, it was like a parlor game. Like it wasn't actually doing anything. And that became very boring. But all of this that we're talking about in terms of this previous art world was contingent. I mean, I'm going to say my favorite thing ever, but like linear media creating a common public sphere. And so when you make a critical gesture, everyone saw it. It was on stage. But with decentralization of media, you had the decentralization also of attention. There was no longer an embarrassment of the collector or an embarrassment of the gallerist, a la Merlin Carpenter, say. There was a different economy altogether. And Remilia feels particularly contemporary because it assumes that there's no common public sphere. There is the timeline. Your timeline doesn't look like mine. But if you can reach a certain velocity, maybe in a 4chan kind of way, maybe you can make your post stay at the top. And that's what it understands a public sphere to be. In fact, actually, I'm interested in how you characterize value. Obviously, that's a big, open, bad question to ask you because it doesn't have a lot of parameters on it. But we know that attention is value. We know that markets value things. But I'm interested in how you think of the store of value, and maybe that's printing the internet. I'm interested just in how you see value operating within the larger Remilia project, from the NFTs to the criticism to the different ways in which value is produced, particularly in an art context.
So the big distinction, the most obvious one, is something like Milady is under VPL, right? The viral public license. It's basically a non-license. It's a license that says this image can be reproduced, it can be destroyed, it can be used in marketing, do anything with this image. The only requirement is that each time a derivative is made from this image, that also has to be under VPL, under viral public license. So what this basically says is the sort of content itself that we're producing has no licensing restrictions on it. This is in stark contrast, right, to I hate to even bring them up, but like the Bored Ape model of NFTs. It's like, oh, you're going to own your IP and you're going to make a movie with your ape and it's going to be like a blockbuster film with like your specific ape and it's going to make you so much money. And like this we find totally absurd. Bored Ape is an extreme example, but a lot of artists also take this approach to NFTs. Like if you're older and you've had an art career and then all of a sudden NFTs come out, you go, oh, I'm going to make an NFT of my art and sell it for money because it's valuable, because I put work into it. We really don't ever think of anything in that way. And like maybe that is some of the millennial moralizing, is this Marxist frame of what constitutes value. But you're also individuated in the internet, which is a massive, infinite world of value. And the value on the internet is not the same as the value in meat space. Instead of doing that, we really took the approach of giving internet users access to the things that they care about, which is like an identity. An identity is a fundamental thing on the internet. You have to sort of identify yourself somehow. And treating the NFT as like a tribal signifier that could capture the value inherent in these subcultures that we were platforming, you could bet on, like, if you think repeat esoteric health nutrition is going to be popular in 3 years, it's a good idea to buy Milady. That sentence sounds ridiculous, but our assets are tied to the cultural capital that we produce.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a fascinating way to think about value. You're scraping the language space online for anything that would build the sign. It's been a long-term strategy of collectives to aggregate creative capital under a single logo or sign or handle in like an open source Luther Blissett kind of way. Mm-hmm. But Milady, because of its existence on a timeline specifically of Twitter, X, all of the cultural detritus in the semiotic space was available for Milady to fold in as part of Milady. So it was able to use that energy as a kind of accelerant or fuel. If it wasn't you, it was maybe one of the other articles in the journal where you said, imagine the network achieving escape velocity. That's a beautiful image of a network becoming autonomous. I mean, it's very CCRU also, of course. This is just like classic accelerationist in a way, but to see it playing out now, it's a very beautiful image, a kind of internet that can escape the rest of the internet.
Yeah, the thing that we're building is Remilia Chat is like our main product that we're aiming for. And it is fundamentally like a goal to reshape the internet. Like we are trying to build a real social network that is on par with the heavy hitting big platforms. And this is partially what drew me in to Remilia, was this understanding of this opportunity. Like it is a decentralized art collective that now has a sort of corporate power that is very unusual. And we do have the sort of opportunity to build a new internet that's not just splintered off of the current internet, but is actively like eating away at these other platforms. Having an opportunity like that at all is very rare. We very much want to channel this energy away from these current platforms that are all monetized off of destroying their users and putting them in silos.
So in the quarterly, there's discussion of this legacy art world and its failings. Remilia participants is the kind of refugees from that art world. I mean, I can really relate to this. I think a lot of people who had exposure to the pre-2010 art world went through something of a existential crisis during the teens, because you just saw something that seemed, it was hegemonic. I mean, that was like the order of things, the canon. I mean, that just felt immovable. You saw it more or less dissolve. But there becomes this interesting, I mean, this is Julian's observation, but Remilia has not just made a new network, it's also making its own art world. You don't need validation from another art world because that art world doesn't really exist. I mean, all the publications that held that up are shadows of themselves. And the most interesting artists who are active in a contemporary sense are increasingly disinterested in that art world. And Remilia has made its own art world. It's like a complete package, which brings up this idea that maybe networks are the new art worlds. Like maybe there'll be many art worlds and they'll be network specific. Each network will have its own protocol of value and communication and transmission and its own kind of social status. I mean, do you think about that consciously? Are you thinking about this as, oh, we're actually building a new art world? Is the term art world maybe even obsolete? Like maybe we don't even need that term anymore. Maybe that's like a 20th century idea. How do you think of this new network? I mean, as a world, art world or otherwise?
Yeah. This does go back to your value question, where it's like, oh, what's the point of having an art world? And it's an attempt to...
If you're hearing this message, you've completed the first step towards becoming a New Models member. To continue, visit patreon.com/newmodels or newmodels.substack.com. A complete library containing hundreds of rare New Models episodes awaits.